And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24 ahead of the second reading of Budget 2026. We will discuss with the private sector, economists, business leaders, and especially the chambers in Sri Lanka, the government's role ahead of the budget and also the policy directions they expect the government to take as Sri Lanka looks for stability, reform and recovery moving ahead. I've invited to discuss all this to our studios representatives of chambers and an economist. Let me first introduce to you Bingumal Thewarathanthri, Vice Chairperson of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. A very warm welcome to you and thank you for making the time to be here. We also have with us Prabu Rajakulendran, Lead Economist for Verité Research. Thank you for your presence here as well. And we have with us Sampath Jayasundara, Vice Chairman of SLASSCOM, the Sri Lanka Association for Software and Services Companies. I think we intend to discuss the digital space, Sri Lanka's digital economy as well. So thank you for your presence here. I'd like to start off talking about, maybe I'll ask this question from all three panelists today, the big picture really, as we head into Budget 2026, how would you each describe the state of Sri Lanka's economy and whether we are in recovery or whether we are still in survival mode? The question is whether we are seeing fragile stability or fragile recovery still at this point. I'll start off with Bingumal.
Yes, so Sri Lanka has done extremely well from a macro standpoint coming out of a default. We're just 1 year down the line after the rating upgrade, almost 1 year. Fiscal buffers are being built. We might reach something like 3.5–4% of primary surplus this year against the IMF target of 2.3%. Our reserves are hovering on 6 billion plus 3.5 months of reserves. When you compare some of the emerging markets, that's not a big problem as we see. Even if you go back to 2015, 2016 era, I think we had 6 billion of reserves at the time. So we should not worry too much about it. From a stability standpoint, I would say we are in a very good position. So Sri Lanka will have to stay on course, ride this wave for a couple of more years. The reality is still more than 50% of the income goes for interest. So interest to revenue ratio is still very high, one of the highest in the world. So therefore, staying on course, broadening the tax base, digitization, more importantly, the reforms would be critical for Sri Lanka. But we have to be very happy about the situation we are in.
I'll turn to the digital side of our economy as well. From your perspective, Sampath, where do you think Sri Lanka stands today?
I think overall, as Bingumal rightly mentioned, we are in the recovery mode. And the stability is what is important even to develop the digital economy. We are talking about building a digital economy worth $15 billion. And same time export revenue, ICT point of view, $5 billion by 2030. If you are to continue that agenda, a lot to do in this space. Especially policy level, policy consistency is very, very critical. If you want to attract foreign direct investment into ICT area. And the good thing is when you compare IT industry, value addition is very high. So if you bring investments to Sri Lanka, investors might expect stability of the country, then the single window for them to deal with. So I think what matters is country stability, the policy consistency, and single window for them to deal with. So Sri Lanka is attractive in terms of digital area, but of course you have to attract more investment to Sri Lanka.
I think the economist perspective is also important here, whether we're still in survival mode, whether we are seeing fragile recovery or even stability in this scenario.
So the way I would see Sri Lanka's recovery in that sense is, I have to agree with the two of them, where on the macro side you see we're doing pretty much a lot better. And the way to assess is, are we doing better than what the IMF expected us to do, which is a baseline way of looking at it. We're doing better on growth, we're doing better on every possible fiscal indicator you look at except interest to revenue. The IMF expected interest to revenue to come down quite fast. We are still at above 50%, like Mr. Bingumal said. So on the macro side, on paper, we are doing good. Inflation is low. It is debatable whether it's good or bad, but price levels not increasing as fast for a common man is good. But where do we need to do better is when you start looking at the real indicators. Poverty has tripled from pre-crisis levels and is expected to be above for the next few years. Real wages are below 2016 levels, so even though prices are reducing at a faster rate, wages haven't caught up, so you cannot afford as much as you used to before the crisis. Another thing is employment. Only 46% of the working age is employed, which is a 20-year low. So translating these macroeconomic recoveries into real life outcomes have yet to be materialized, but on paper, yes, there is recovery. Fiscally, we're doing good, reserves are doing good, but has the life changed for the common man is yet to be seen and yet to materialize on the numbers in that front. So yes, stability is there, but I'm more focused on development of the human life, and that is yet to be seen.
You mentioned the common man. What indicators do you think we should look to understand whether we are turning a corner here, whether this real growth is reaching the pockets of average citizen?
That's a good question, because the common number you see thrown around is the growth rate, and the IMF expected 3% growth, we have a 5% growth. But in economics, you can grow by simply producing guns and butter. Doesn't mean the life of the common man has improved. There are very few indicators that you can look at, and those were the ones I said, like poverty levels, employment, and even real wages are ways of looking at affordability, and are good indicators that need to be given equal importance as much as you give fiscal and reserves as well, because you can grow with high levels of inequality, which is not the development you want to see as well.
I'd like to turn to Bingumal. What signals or expectations does the private sector have for budget 2026? There's been a lot of hype about what representation, especially chambers as the Ceylon Chamber or SLASSCOM or important private sector representatives make. What signals or expectations do you have as we move ahead into 2026?
Yeah, so there's a long list. I'll summarize. I'll probably cover the key ones. One big thing that we've been lobbying for years is the single window for trade. This had been a discussion from 1980s. I think gained some momentum in 16-17 with our trade facilitation agreement commitments with WTO. I think we have to get it, because over 80 countries are working on a single window for trade, or already got a single window for trade. Markets like Singapore has really gone ahead. It will really improve the trade efficiency by 30-40%. So something that trade chamber had been lobbying and will continue to lobby. It's a simple, I wouldn't say simple, it's a complex single platform for all the parties to participate. It really eases trade, and for the exporter and the importer, it's critical that you have transparency, better turnaround time to get this trade hub opportunity up and running for Sri Lanka, because there's a huge opportunity, because we'll probably come to like 10%, 25% of Singapore's capacity by next year on the port capacity. So it's critical that we get the trade platform right. Second most important thing that we've been pushing and discussing, and there have been a lot of discussions around it with the government, is public-private partnerships. So there's now a lot of momentum on that. We've given our feedback as a chamber. We expect a very independent PPP law coming in, where private capital will be well received by the government. We're not driving privatization here. It's about making sure the private capital is deployed properly and government has access to the private capital, and a better transparent process to drive it. Digitization in terms of public digital infrastructure is another one that we've been pushing. We've seen some momentum on the digital ID. GovPay is a great example of getting things going. I think we've got about 1 billion worth of payments on GovPay now, about 200 agencies on GovPay. So those are some of the other things that we've been working on. The other most important thing, and it's a long-term one, is the whole trade agreements with the countries. Because Sri Lanka, if you look at, we always talk about this hub and the location. We've been talking it for years. Now the interesting part is the South-South trade is growing at a rate. South-South trade is now bigger than the North-North trade. So you're right in the center. If you look at India and China, the growth, India-China growth contributes to 50% of global growth. So if we get our trade agreements right with the ASEAN countries, the opportunity for Sri Lanka to become India +1 or a China +1, or be a a significant play in the ASEAN markets is critical. So we have advocated for a separate agency for trade facilitation as well. Those are the key ones.
Separate agency that is led by the private
FTAs,
sector?
Yeah. No. So government-led agency with private sector participation who will focus only on trade facilitation or trade agreements and focusing more on RCEP at this point more than anything else. Getting into RCEP, I think government has indicated that they want to be in RCEP. There had been BRIC conversation as well. But largely we are pushing for RCEP because that's like 90% of South-South trade is in RCEP, the ASEAN patch. So if Sri Lanka is a member of that, we can easily be like India +1, we can do component manufacturing, be a larger part of the India's manufacturing hub. So Chamber had been pushing for those.
Right.
I mean, there are few others as well, but in the interest of time.
You mentioned the single window. For years, again, we've been talking about one-stop shop. We've been talking about this to facilitate trade. With Trump tariffs, as we call it, of course, the IMF says the impact has been less than feared, but still, is Sri Lanka complacent about the situation now? Have we really taken stock of the uncertainties, the risks that we are facing, at least from a private sector perspective?
I don't think we are complacent. I think Sri Lanka as a small country has done a brilliant job in terms of trade negotiation with the US. US being US, they came up with a tariff, they brought it down. There's still conversations going on with India and China. So I think we have to be very happy with the tariff outcome. We have to now play to our strength and continue to focus on the US market because that's a huge market. It's also an opportunity for Sri Lanka to diversify the trade into UK, Europe and the ASEAN markets. So that work is also happening as we speak. Then again, diversify into other products. That's another thing that we have to do. So to all of that, getting the investment climate sorted would be critical. So the other thing that Chamber is pushing is the Be Ready Index. We've been talking about ease of doing business in the past. Now the World Bank has come up with a thing called a Be Ready Index. Be Ready Index is, I think about 50 countries have gone there now. They'll add more countries in 2026. It talks a lot about the regulatory framework, the government services and efficiency. Those are the three pillars. Then it has other things like taxation, time to get the license, labor laws, all of that, land allocation, all of that, and then entry barriers as well as exit barriers. So Be Ready Index will be a big one to battle. We expect something around that in this budget because the reality is we have not got that investment climate right yet. We can't complain a lot because we are coming out of default. But if you look at the amount of zones, that's the other thing the Chamber has lobbied in terms of private sector led zones as well as private sector jointly partner with government and to do zones, economic zones and export zones. If you look at markets like Thailand, they have added like 10 zones in the last 10 years. Malaysia added big zones. What have we done? We've done few in the north, but we have not really added economic zones in the last 20 years in my view. Of course, port city is we've been again spending a lot of time on that in the last 10 years. We've not done much in the last 10 years to get the port city opportunity up and running. So we expect something around economic zones as well coming from the government, and the whole PPP law and making sure the PPP law is independent from BOI and other public finance policy and all that is also critical. And the governance is very critical. I mean, it's not about government taking control or private sector taking control, because the partnerships are built on trust and mutual respect and shared value. So Chamber had been pushing for that as well. Of course, there's a larger SOE reform agenda that we've been lobbying. We expect something similar to something like a Temasek, a process of running some of these SOEs, listing some of these SOEs in the market, then more governance in terms of how do we appoint people to these SOEs. Then the other thing is, do we really need to run all these SOEs under the government? Can we get some private sector participation? All of that Chamber had been lobbying and doing a lot of work around it as well.
Right. I think SOEs will be also a critical area that we want to discuss later on in the program. The IT BPM industry performed very well even during the crisis. What recommendations or strategic interventions would you want the government to focus on during this budget, not just for 2026, because we're looking at a longer term growth and also to attract more investments here to position Sri Lanka as a serious global hub? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, good question again. So when you look at the overall situation in Sri Lanka, we are a knowledge economy. So our literacy rates are extremely high. So you can attract good population to IT industry. If you really look at current situation, we are producing around 17,000 IT related graduates every year from public and private universities. That's a good number, country like Sri Lanka. So what we expect from budget point of view, especially the chamber point of view, SLASSCOM chamber point of view. So one area is how to run the digital agenda. So that is very critical, okay, digitalization process, especially starting with digital ID, because digital ID will act as the main critical infrastructure for any of other services to run. So digital ID, if we can complete within a short period of time, it will open digitalization agenda for many areas. So slowly we can getting into a digital wallet. Now, like Bingumal mentioned, like GovPay is in operation. We know like how many transactions happening and how that is increasing week on week. So that's good side of it, like because we can bring people into digital services very easily. We can remember when we introduced a QR code for fuel. So we sort out a matter like within a short period of time, within hours.
Bringing those long queues to an end.
Exactly. So Sri Lankans will get into these systems if systems are available and user friendly. So digital payment systems are very critical, and a wallet, because there were so many Sri Lankans, especially the bottom of the pyramid, benefit out of government funding. Like so if you can have a digital wallet, we can control that and we can understand where we are heading as a country. On the other hand, if we can have a super app layer, so super app layer, we can be again a single window for citizens to access most of government services. It's one app. You go there, you do all the payments. It can connect to multiple areas like the immigration to whatever, the payments to municipal council to, so that's what we require. So we need a longer term agenda, at least good 3 to 5 year agenda to run that consistently till you achieve results. So the chamber point of view, SLASSCOM point of view, we are there to support. What we are trying to do is, even at the moment, even last week we had a detailed discussion, digital ministry, the new agency we are going to form on the ICT area, and the chambers. We can work together and run the same agenda. But government point of view, we need the policy consistency. That is very, very important. Now, simple example, port city is a great opportunity. So how to leverage that opportunity as a country? That's where we can create a hub. In Sri Lanka, like we are close to many large economies in the region. ASEAN is a good region we can work with. And so simple example, we can even attract cloud infrastructure providers to come and set up in Sri Lanka. Of course, we have to work on the policies and how to source energy, and there are other areas we have to look at, like can't just bring cloud services to country and open up immediately, but we have to work on the policies and everything to make those opportunities enable. So that consistency we are expecting, and to run the digital agenda without much disturbances. So private sector is ready to support. Because
an enabling environment is, I think, something that both chambers have been talking about. Yeah. But when we talk about the ICT, IT or BPM industries, we've seen Hyderabad in India transform within a short span of time. And there is a massive investment that has come to that city as it adopted policy changes, infrastructure. So what is the missing link here when we're just a couple of hours away from Hyderabad?
Yeah, so good question. Of course, like we are just coming out of the issue. So like, most of these investors expect economic stability, the policy reforms, what is required to bring those investment, and even tax holidays. Like, simple example, we heard like, the tax holiday limit start from $50 million. But if you look at ICT industry point of view, sometimes investment can be smaller values, because you don't need to put big factories and other infrastructure development. So you can invite, because manpower is available within the country. So you can invite global players. In fact, even we are working with SLASSCOM in India. So we have built a very strong relationship. There are even the leadership, SLASSCOM leadership discussion, annual discussion is happening in Colombo this year. We are bringing them to Colombo just to make sure, like, and they know about the country, they know about the reforms agenda we are working on, and invite them to come and establish, because if Sri Lanka, they can consider as a tier 2 city in India. So the big companies in India now, they are already moving to tier 2 and tier 3 cities even. So
that's within India?
Within India,
okay.
Within India. So like, since it's close proximity, we are inviting them to consider Sri Lanka as a tier 2 city and establish their IT operation from an alternate destination. So that can lead our digital agenda, like, pretty fast. So those are the things we have to work with. Neighboring country, we have to engage always. Like, Sri Lanka is a neutral destination. So you can work with many ASEAN region countries to move that fast. I think, like, we have to invite them to come and invest in Sri Lanka, and we have to create that environment to support those investments and pretty fast track the investments.
Raj, I think you might have something to add from an economist lens, whether our current fiscal and monetary trends give confidence to investors that Sri Lanka is ready while the recovery process is ongoing, whether we are ready to welcome large-scale investors or whether it's small investments, the stability to other indicators, whether they're in the right places.
So I don't want to repeat what the rest of the panel also said, but we are doing good on the macro levels, that like I said earlier, but it is also something that you need to expect over a long period of time, which is policy consistency and moving forward. But I want to also bring in the angle of inclusivity and equity into the policy priorities as we move forward. We heard about trade and digitization and the IT sector, which is all equally important, but the policies that I want to or that Verité had proposed focuses largely on equality and equity as well. One example is Sri Lanka has a high aging population and spending on elder care facilities. This was part of the manifestos also, but investing in elder care facilities is a huge benefit for the country, because it's not about how much you spend, it's how well you spend as well, and the quality of spending is quite important. The elder care facility is not going to cost so much, but it's going to help contribute a lot, and also female labor force participation in Sri Lanka is quite low. It's also because the women in the household care for either the kid or the adults in the family, and this allows for women to participate in the economy. And countries that have grown massively without suffering high levels of inequality, like Vietnam and so on, have also seen a high growth in female labor force participation. On that vein, another proposal that we had was for state to fund maternity leave benefits, because there's an inherent bias of hiring men against women, because these companies have to pay for maternity leave benefits. And this is an international concept where the ILO, the International Labour Organization, have ratified conventions where it says that where the state has to bear the cost of maternity leave. Sri Lanka has ratified to that convention but hasn't really implemented policies in that convention. So these are easy fixes, is not going to cost you a lot, but is going to move the needle for the common man massively, and also have inclusive growth for the country. I also think in terms of equity, we have this concept of crisis fiscalism, which is during a crisis, governments have used the opportunity of the crisis and the fear of the crisis to pass a lot of unequal policies, or policies that really affect the poor or are quite regressive. So now that we see stability, we see revenue coming in, we see fiscally we are doing strong, it is high time we focus on ensuring that it is not just collecting revenue and growing, it's also how we collect the revenue.
So what of these policies or legal measures would you like reversed according to Verité's proposals?
That's right. So one good example is VAT. Our VAT is currently at 18%. There is always a theoretical debate, is VAT regressive, does it affect the poor or not? The reason for that debate is usually VAT has a lot of exemptions. So if you are a poor household, you wouldn't spend a lot of things that have VAT. For example, like milk powder, education, books are usually VAT exempt. So the poor doesn't spend on stuff that is charged VAT, so it's not regressive. But when we did our VAT policy, we removed a lot of exemptions. So because of that, VAT, the argument that is it affecting the poor is a lot more simpler, because the exemptions have vastly been removed. There are some exemptions. So it is a regressive policy, and that can come down, but that doesn't mean that you reduce VAT, because Sri Lanka in its revenue collection depends a lot on indirect taxes and VAT in that sense. One way you will alternate is to look at progressivity, and there is a lot of room to fix. One example is how many individuals in Sri Lanka have tax files. Currently, it's 8.7% of the working age, which is what we used to have in 2019. So it's a recovery in that sense. But the moment you start looking at regionally, Nepal has almost 18% of their working age as registered taxpayers. India has 13%. They are in GDP per capita terms a lot poorer than Sri Lanka. So we really need to broaden our tax base and get the tax net. One proposal that we said that didn't, of course, get a lot of traction, but was implemented was to increase the withholding tax on interest income from 5 to 10%. That can still be used as a tool to get more people into the tax net. The only people who will complain are the ones who haven't paid taxes or the ones who are struggling to file taxes, because tax filing is another problem. So that is where digitization comes in, where you create systems, make it easier to file taxes and make it easier to get your refunds. But that doesn't mean you take off the withholding tax as well, because that's a good tool to get people into the tax net. Those are proposals that I would say that need to come in a more, to bring in the equity aspect as we grow, because we don't want to have growth followed by debt like we had from 2010 onwards. We also don't want to have growth where there is just a small group of people that are benefiting and there's high levels of inequality. So simply looking at growth and not looking at other indicators doesn't paint the entire picture. And the moment you start giving a progressivity lens and this lens of human flourishing, there is room for development as well. And that doesn't take away from the other proposals that mentioned, but this also means that this needs to be given equal weight as we talk about stability, as we talk about foreign direct investments and so on.
Taxation, of course, it's an entirely different topic to discuss. Many of my guests have spoken about why governments, or at least policies, don't focus on the top tier or even those who should be taxed, and why do we focus on value-added tax or even withholding tax? Does Verité have an opinion on that?
The reason can be multiples. One is that there is also the problem that we are in an IMF program, and Sri Lanka tends to simply blindly follow the IMF program in its sense. So if the IMF program has measures, we follow it and we don't think beyond. The second is taxing the rich requires a lot of resources and effort and a lot of audits, a lot of digitization. The level of effort it requires to resource the Inland Revenue Department, creating high wealth units, which to their credit have been done, needs a lot more effort than simply increasing VAT. It's a lot more easier to do, and we do it because it's easy. But there is a limit to where you can do easy fixes. It comes down to hard reforms like revenue administration, like we spoke about, filing taxes digitally, making sure refunds are quite straightforward, doing tax audits on high wealth individuals, and even maintaining tax databases. For example, Sri Lanka has been talking about an integrated treasury management information system, ITMIS, for the past 10 years at least. But we've been failing to deliver on the digitization of that system. RAMIS has its own set of problems. Without fixing those, it becomes very difficult to simply say tax the rich, which is why we tend to rely on indirect taxes, but it's high time we fix those as we move forward.
Right, I'd like to turn to Bingumal again. The Ceylon Chamber has made a number of proposals, I think last year as well. So the question is whether these proposals are taken seriously. And secondly, you represent a wider cross-section of the private sector. What signals is the private sector really looking for stability, growth and confidence? Because I hear from both chambers that policy consistency and confidence building and that conducive environment for investments is key to move forward from where we are.
Yeah, so in terms of how the government has engaged us, so how we have engaged the government, last year we gave a long list of budget proposals like we always do. They took 17 of those into the budget. Out of the 17, we've seen good traction on 6, things like the single window, digital ID and things like that. And 8 work in progress, a bit slow. 3 they have not started yet. So that's the status. But it's a good start, because in the past we've been giving budget proposals, but we don't recap next year when we discuss. So this time when we discussed with the government, we first showed what we proposed last time, what they have taken, what's working, what's not working. There was a good conversation before even we started our new proposals. Now on the new proposal, I think I explained the larger national themes around private sector participation, better governance, Be Ready Index, PPP law and then focusing on trade agreements and all of that. The other thing that I think I missed talking about is the whole tourism opportunity.
Right.
Now, tourism is a low-hanging fruit. We've been always talking about it. We will definitely cross 2.2, 2.3 million tourists this year. We might not reach the 4 billion target. We might not. We used to have 4 billion before before Easter tax, if I'm not mistaken. We never reached that level yet. Bali is looking at something like 7 million tourists this year or more. They've already reached 4 million tourists by July. This is Bali, right? We are not even half of it at this point. And if you look at only outbound India, I mean, we have to focus on few corridors. Okay, UK is a big corridor, Europe is a corridor, but India is our biggest corridor. China is one of our main corridors. If we focus on the key corridors and come up with a destination marketing campaign, that'll have a huge benefit for the country. If you look at India alone, India this year, they're looking at something like 29 million outbound travelers. It's a $40 billion economy. Outbound travel economy is 40 billion. If you take 5% of that, you're talking about 2 billion only from India. So we're not looking at that opportunity in a big way, in my view. We are doing a lot of good things. I mean, we're creating some space in the airport. We added another 14, 15 counters. We're adding another 6 bus gates. I think there's a plan to restack the counters and create small counters and have 75, 74 permanent counters when you go out of the airport. Incoming, we have created e-gates and all that. So there's a lot of good work happening, but we need a proper airport expansion. So Chamber had been lobbying for the airport expansion as well as a destination marketing campaign and better tourism governance as well in terms of park management, the whole thing, the whole ecosystem, how we manage, including railways and all of that.
Right. I think SLASSCOM will have also something to comment on private sector confidence and stability. You mentioned about the conducive environment, but especially when we talk about a digital economy, might not be something that Sri Lanka has geared towards or focused on creating that kind of environment. So what key regulations or policy changes or even new introductions, because we haven't had that kind of legal background, would you like introduced here?
I think we have a lot of important policies enacted by the Parliament last few years, even data protection side. That is one of the important area, because if you are targeting data centers and other value-added services, it's very important to have data protection, and we have the authority also established, and there are a few things to sort out, and we can fast track some of these things. That is very important. And even related, as I told you, if you want to bring data centers, there are related policies you have to establish, like, you know, and we may have to revisit some of the Electronic Transaction Act and other acts. So these are, we have to change ongoing basis, considering the global demand. So those are very important. And also, like, if you want to attract, as I told you, investments, especially IT area, IT BPM industry, there are a lot of opportunities in the country, within the country, but of course, like, you know, how to provide these tax concessions and other benefits. That is very important. Like, if you want to attract global companies to Sri Lanka, especially from the ASEAN region, and also from big giants, and because that is already happening in other countries, like especially country like India. So why can't we replicate? On the other hand, we have to benchmark Sri Lanka against our regional countries on the economic attractiveness side. So what is Singapore doing? What is Malaysia doing? What is India doing? And what is happening in Sri Lanka? So if you benchmark, you can understand those gaps, and then you can really drive that agenda, how to be competitive. If you want to create an economic hub, we also call it an IT hub in the region. So how are you going to create it? So we have to benchmark with other countries and understand what are the gaps and where we should do course corrections immediately. There can be areas where we can correct immediately, like some of the even systems like tax systems, the other systems. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. You go and understand what is the missing piece of most of these areas. And if we fix those areas immediately, we can sort out many issues. Now, simple example, if the single window concept takes time, we can create an account management process, like, you know, let's say one contact for investors to work with. So the local contact work with many other local agencies to make that happen. Because if things are getting delayed, so we can fast track some of these things by doing those small changes. So those are the important areas we have to work on. Other thing is, this digital economy agenda, we have to make it a policy, 5-year plan. and execute with proper timelines. That is very, very important. Digital ID we are talking about, I think, more than 15 years now. So that should happen.
But India managed to do
Exactly.
Aadhaar over.
Yeah, so
it sounded like it was overnight, although there was planning. But the introduction and implementation happened.
That won't take long years, like So I would say, like within months you can implement that sort of a thing, because Sri Lanka we are talking about 21 million population. So bring them. We have a proper structure to collect that
and
data
highly
as well.
literate too.
Yeah, and already there's so much of information available in multiple agencies. If you look at the immigration to ID card office to most of this information available.
Right.
It's a matter of consolidating and establishing that unit fast as possible.
Very quickly before we go in for a break, is the talent drain a concern? You mentioned about the existing talent. If we want to replicate what Hyderabad did, is that a concern here? If that is still, what policy measures or taxation would you really want or like to be introduced in order to retain youth and talent within the country?
Yeah, there's a big difference between IT industry and other industries' talent point of view, because our talents are globally competitive. A simple example, if a DevOps engineer, let's say with AI capability, you are not only competitive within the country, you are competitive globally. So with 3 years experience, you can go to any country and work, whether you're US or Singapore, any other country, you can just go and work. So it's very important to retain that good talent. If you want to retain, so we should be able to pay the global rate. That is very important. One of the main issue is like in even the pay tax. I mean 36% tax on these engineering efforts. Top of that, you have to pay VAT and other tax as well. Like it's not just like only 36%. So then they tend to go out of the country and earn from dollars. So those are some of the things we have to look at, like seriously. So how to retain that talent and how to bring them back. India did this nicely, like because there are a lot of people moved out of India somewhere around 1990s and early 2000 era. But now majority are coming in with investments. So we can do the same thing. We can invite like our diaspora population to come and invest in Sri Lanka in this area. Especially I know like Jaffna, the northern part, there are a lot of investment coming and they want to establish like businesses in Jaffna. So we can create a investment zones in that area, especially like with private public partnerships. A simple example, I think like in the government agenda there are two hubs they are going to create, one in Galle and one in Kurunegala, as per the available information. So we don't need government to do that. Like we have to invite the private sector companies or the global players to come and work with the government and manage those innovation centers and other trade zones with a proper partnership. That's why even the Act, PPP Act is important. That will play a major role. So these things will help country to move forward. At the same time, I'll add another point, startups. Because see, startup ecosystem, we are believing very good point to build our economy, because now India is producing one unicorn in every 9 days. If India can produce one unicorn in every 9 days, I'm talking about IT sector. So why can't we do that? So you have to give a helping hand to startups, especially like funding mechanism. So even when you invite like the venture capital, how to avoid this double taxation, other related problems. So if you sort out, if you give a helping hand to these startups with innovation centers, the proper infrastructure availability for them to come and do their like research work, that is the missing piece. So if you can establish that, we can fast track and create a couple of unicorns in a few years, not immediately, but within few years.
Right, I think on that note, we'll take a short break here at Hyde Park on At Derana 2020, At Derana ahead of Budget 2026, as we discuss private sector perspectives and what Sri Lanka's economy urgently requires at this point. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back. We are in conversation with the private sector on Sri Lanka's economic reforms as Sri Lanka looks to recover and lasting growth, or at least long-term growth, as we discuss Sri Lanka's reform and recovery process. We are in conversation with Mr. Bingumal Thewarathanthri, Vice Chairperson of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Sampath Jayasundara, Vice Chairman of SLASSCOM, as well as Prabu Rajakulendran, Lead Economist for Verité Research. I'd like to turn to Bingumal now. We've been talking about the Chamber's interventions in the past, whether this has been receptive or not, but with a stability, reform, recovery. The SMEs also remain a major component, the engine of Sri Lanka's economy, we say. Is there enough focus on the small, medium, and even micro players?
I think a lot of work to be done, in my view, especially on the SMEs. They're like 50% of the economy and gone through a lot during the pandemic. See, generally about our view in terms of stability, reforms, growth. Generally, when you're in an IMF program, couple of years into the IMF program, we get tired very quickly, and then we want to stretch the program and change things. I think getting out of the program is non-negotiable, but stretching and negotiating hard, like Raj said, would be critical, right? In that context, we also spoke about labor migration as well. I think we had to negotiate for some. I mean, I'll probably touch the labor piece later, especially on the SME piece. We have seen light at the end of the tunnel, especially on the credit to the private sector. Initially, we saw the big companies borrowing. It's growing at about 21% now. Now we have seen many SMEs also accessing finance, and slowly, you know, especially it's largely driven by tourism, I would say tourism-led growth. So tourism-led FMCG, tourism-led construction, tourism-led so many other ecosystems. We've seen a lot of momentum. Other SMEs as well, we've seen finally, you know, they have come and renegotiated on their debt, because there's a huge debt pile on some of these SMEs. The renegotiations are happening in terms of settlements, etc. See, after a default, we have to ride this cycle. I don't think we have a, you know, magic answer right now to, you know, sort out every problem. But we need to focus more on SMEs. I think we had SME Development Fund last year. I can't recall how many, you know, SMEs used it. I think the industry ministry's got a program as well to relook at some of the SMEs and come up with a program to get concessional funding. That program is continuing, but we have not seen enough sign-ups. The other important aspect also, SMEs had this way of working where, you know, you employ people and you at that level, so you don't have all the governance around EPF and all that, and the taxes and all that. I think that piece would be critical in the future, because the more than, I mean, millions of people work in the SMEs. A lot of those people are really struggling from a minimum income standpoint. More than, I would say, 70–80% of our income levels are less than 100,000 in the country. So they are definitely vulnerable. They are not below poverty, but definitely vulnerable. So how do you look after the employees of those SMEs? So coming back to, again, Raj's point, the whole vulnerable sector, there's a linkage to how we protect the SMEs as well in terms of protecting some of those vulnerable sectors. So some program around supporting SMEs would be critical. But Chamber got SME vertical, and we've been driving SME governance, SME development agenda for years, working very closely with the industries ministry as well. And we've seen a lot of traction, and people who really want to access markets, they come and join us. We find them buyers, suppliers, get them to network and, you know, find the markets for them. So I think we have to focus on few sectors. Let's keep the trading type of SMEs aside. There are many SMEs who are really developing something for the global market. How do you make sure we connect those SMEs with the right buyer? How do you make sure that they do a sustainable production? So, you know, from a environmental sustainability standpoint, that they qualify, especially for EU. That for transparency, traceability and all that. So Chamber had been doing some work on that as well in terms of educating SMEs on those aspects. Carbon credits, of course, is another outcome of this. But overall, Chamber view is like we are very happy about the growth outcomes, but we would like to see faster turnaround time from the government on the key agendas.
All right. Raj, you might have something to comment on the debt restructuring process. It has been long, a process that has taken a lot of effort. At the same time, we've been talking about going through the process to send a strong message to partners outside the country. So are we really just managing this program at this point, or are we focusing on growth? Because growth, it seems, is not as much as we had expected. And to add to that, because in the interest of time, I'd also like to add about SOE reforms and tax administration. I think you spoke about taxes, so SOE reforms. Are we really giving the attention that we need to, or at least the IMF would like us to?
So on the debt restructuring front, I think Sri Lanka, even globally, was new to debt restructuring. We were one of the first in South Asia to restructure. So there was a lot of learning. There were new models applied to Sri Lanka by the IMF. And we took one of the longest durations to complete our debt restructuring process. But on the commercial debt side, we have completed it, and the new bonds are trading. On the bilateral side, we have to finalize some negotiations. The domestic debt restructuring was done. There was criticisms on how it was done and how the pension funds were targeted in the debt restructuring space. But most of the debt restructuring is done. But what we see is at least on the foreign debt side, what we've done is essentially kicking the can down the road. We've pushed most of our repayments beyond 2030, so we have a bit of debt relief up to 2030, and then most of the repayments are bunched up post 2030. So if you're looking at until 2030, debt repayments aren't your biggest concern, but you need to build enough buffers so that you have enough to repay post, and you don't get into another debt restructuring cycle. But the major concern we have is the IMF's program is mostly focused on consolidating fiscal deficits and monetary deficits, and it's all about stability. The people I heard is talking about growth. The IMF isn't too focused on growth in its program, and that's the reason why you don't see high level of growth projections. The growth projections in the IMF program is very muted. The country is focused on, there is talk about needing to grow and get out of the crisis and grow your way out of the crisis. But the way we've seen the progress on reform so far is simply to follow the IMF program blindly. And the IMF program certainly needs to be part of Sri Lanka's development plan, but that shouldn't be the only plan that's out there, and certainly need not be followed blindly. Let me give you two examples. One example is, we've talked about proposals. All of these proposals need money in some form by the government. But the government, as part of the IMF program, has already put a limit on how much they can spend, at least primary expenditure, at 13% of GDP. So even if we manage to collect revenues at 20%, 25%, we can only spend 13% of GDP, which clearly needs to change. The second thing is, by blindly following the IMF program, we have set a revenue target of 15.2% of GDP for the next year. The governance-linked bond that Sri Lanka issued in its own debt restructuring program asks for a revenue to GDP of 15.3%. A 0.1% difference, but that 0.1% can cost Sri Lanka $70 million in debt repayment. We'll have to pay additional if we don't achieve this revenue target. So there is problems when you simply follow the IMF program without putting your own thought or own set of negotiating scrutiny into it. So there clearly needs to be effort put into how we go about the IMF program. Briefly talk about the SOEs. I think the SOEs, there is a lot of plan, there are a lot of committees that are set, that have thought about SOEs. There is simply now need for implementation of the reforms and being transparent of what these reforms are. Because there have been a lot of councils, a lot of committees that have decided, there are a lot of reports that are submitted, but the reports aren't made public, so we need to know what these reforms are, and the reforms simply need to take place. So I might just end with this. There is this common saying that says, grant me the serenity to accept the changes that I cannot, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. With the budget, I hope Sri Lanka has the discipline to implement the things that make sense, courage to amend the things and negotiate the things that need to be changed, and the will to go beyond the program and actually implement reforms that focus on equity and growth at the same time.
Right, I think we also would like to have your opinion and SLASSCOM's perspective here in terms of whether it's growth or bringing industries together. You mentioned how digitization could really transform Sri Lanka's economy. We speak about agriculture, we speak about farming, whether it's tourism or even the SMEs. What's the big challenge here for Sri Lanka as we move forward? You spoke about the number of reforms that we need, but amidst the risks that we face, what's the biggest challenge you see, and how do you think Sri Lanka is really positioned to overcome?
Yeah, I think there's no issue in terms of talent. I think there's all these agendas to move. I believe there should be center of excellence and the leadership to drive these areas. Now, if you look at individual areas, SME growth, so who is running that agenda? That's very, very important. Like, someone to take the responsibility with proper KPIs, run for next 5 years and achieve that SME growth. Even tourism sector. So we know, clearly we can develop the country, with few sectors like IT, tourism, and identified 5 sectors. You have a proper plan for next 5-6 years and drive that agenda for growth. On the other hand, connecting these industries. Now, simple example, IT industry, we can connect with many other industries, like let's say tourism sector, how to take our message to global market through social media. So we have to do a heavy, very properly planned agenda to how to take Sri Lankan tourism sector to global markets like UK, even the Europe, and then neighboring country India. So that will help. Even the agriculture sector modernization required with the support of technology. So then we can improve the productivity in that sector. Even the transportation of products from village to Colombo city, so how to use technology to reduce the wastage. So there are many areas you can do integrations between industries that will support growing the industry. As I told you, SME sector will play a major role. You have to focus on that. Not only IT SMEs, so startups and SME sector across industries. We need a proper plan to grow, and what sort of support government can provide with, of course, public-private partnerships, how to grow these industries.
I'm told I have a minute each for all 3 panelists, so we'll just have your final message. Anything you want to directly share, whether it's how we are going to maintain coherence between actual promises or announced decisions and fiscal allocations, or whether it's the long term for Sri Lanka's economy. I'll start with Bingumal.
So I would say we would expect, of course, stability we've been talking about. We would expect more open discussion for a private sector participation. That's the expectation, and a faster turnaround time,
right,
and execution.
Raj?
I would focus that the budget focuses not just on growth, but taking everybody with them and being more inclusive and coming up with progressive and equitable policies.
Yeah. So the short-term plan should execute immediately, targeting low-hanging fruits. Same time, we have to have the long-term agenda as well, and private sector participation can play a major role in that agenda.
Right. Thank you very much for your time, for sharing your expertise and perspectives with us here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. We were in conversation with the private sector, stakeholders, industry representatives, chamber representatives to discuss Sri Lanka's way out of the crisis, but essentially how Budget 2026 should set the tone, the foundation as we move ahead. Thank you very much, Vice Chairperson of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Bingumal Thewarathanthri, for your time here. And thank you very much, Mr. Sampath Jayasundara, Vice Chairman of the Sri Lanka Association of Software and Services Companies, or SLASSCOM as we know. Thank you for your time, and thank you very much once again, Prabu, Rajakulendran, Lead Economist at Verité Research, for joining us here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. And we promise to bring you yet another discussion post-budget announcement, or the second reading of Budget 2026. We'll see you again next Thursday with yet another conversation here. Have a pleasant evening. Enjoy the rest of the lineup of programs. Good night.